Hi, my name is Imogen, and today we're going to be talking about serotonin. Let me preface this by saying that, as usual in biology, this is probably like way oversimplifying things. Depression in particular is really complicated, and it has a lot of different factors and causes associated with it. So let's talk about neurotransmitters. How do neurotransmitters work? So kind of like on a high level, you can think of it as kind of like a key that plugs into a lock to open a door. You have the key, which is a neurotransmitter like serotonin or dopamine or norepinephrine or whatever. And on the right, you have a receptor site that is designed like very specialized for that particular neurotransmitter. It's a lot like a specific lock that fits into a specific door and opens said door. As an aside, there's a whole bunch of different ways that receptors are activated. You may remember from like your biology class, like over here in the bottom left, you have, or in the bottom right, you have voltage gated channels. This is how your muscles work. Like they send electrical signals that opens up calcium channels and causes your muscles to contract. Over here in the upper left, we have ligand-gated channels. So like a neurotransmitter binds to a receptor, which causes a channel to open up, and then things travel into the cell, which makes things happen. There's a bit more complexity to it than that. Like you have different types of that. You have ligand-gated ion channels, which is kind of what we described before, where it binds to it, opens it up, does its thing, ions travel. And then you have GPCR, which is a bit more complicated, but tends to be a bit more powerful because instead of just immediately opening it, it activates a G protein, which does like a whole bunch of different things within the cell, and which eventually leads to ion channel opening. So things that plug into a receptor site. I mentioned before that it's like a key that plugs into a thing. Turns out that like we have these endogenous chemicals that plug into these receptor sites like serotonin, but you also have, you can take drugs that have effects by binding to those receptor sites. Like we have what you call an agonist, which is something that binds into that receptor site and has an impact. And then you have antagonists, which bind to that receptor, and instead of having an impact, they just don't have any impact. So it effectively blocks your other neurotransmitters from binding to it and doing their thing. There's also like reverse agonists as well that basically do what you would expect them to do. So here's an example of an antagonist. Over here we have on the right, this is morphine. Your body produces its own endogenous opiates, which work because you have receptors for those, and adding other opiates leads to like higher than normal activation of those receptors and has various different impacts on your body. So over here we got morphine. Over here on the left, structurally very similar. This is naloxone, aka Narcan, and this has a really high binding affinity for those receptor sites, and it is an antagonist, meaning that it doesn't have an impact. It doesn't activate anything, it just blocks those receptor sites. And this is like the drug that is used for if people have like an opiate overdose. This is like the thing that will immediately save you because it kind of stops that binding process from happening. Here's another example. Up here, probably something you've seen before. This is serotonin up on top. And on the bottom left, you have psilocin, which is a serotonergic hallucinogenic drug that is one of the two that are most prevalent in magic mushrooms. So like, again, like you can see before, structurally it's very similar, which kind of explains how you're able to unlock this lock. You have a very similar looking key. And over here on the right, this looks a bit funkier, but this is LSD over here, which, it's got a lot more going on here, but if you turn it like 90 degrees, like you still see like you've got this phenyl group here and then like a nitrogen, and then it kind of like loops in with these carbons into another nitrogen. Just as kind of like a random aside, carbon is, organic chemistry is the study of things that have carbon in them. If you look at a molecule like this and you see like, oh, it goes like zigzag like this, these are all carbons, like each point in it. And then it just implies that any open like valence electrons are bound to hydrogens. So the point of this lecture that we're leaning into is let's talk about serotonin and what does serotonin do in particular. And the answer is serotonin does a lot of things. Neurotransmitters are pretty complicated, and you have a lot of different types of receptors that do different things, sometimes in like different parts of the body. Sometimes they can have like different effects, like serotonin. Like there's one place here where you see like 5-HT6 has anxiogenic effects, meaning that it causes anxiety, and then like 5-HT2A causes decreased anxiety. It's an anxiolytic. And like you'll even see like here like that it's 5-HT receptor family signals via a G protein. So it's a G protein coupled receptor. And so neurotransmitters get known for certain things, like dopamine is like the feel-good hormone. Oxytocin is, the love hormone. And as I said, like everything is just way messier. With serotonin in particular, it's really involved in the cardiovascular system. It's important for like regulating like your things, brain blanking. It's also important for like anxiety, memory, mood, vomiting, and it can even like release other neurotransmitters. So it gets really complicated. And what I really want to focus on for this talk is 5-HT2A, which is particularly interesting for depression and anxiety. So here we have a 5-HT2A receptor, which is a specific subset of these serotonin receptors. 5-HT, by the way, just means serotonin, so I'm probably going to use the two interchangeably throughout this. As we mentioned before, psilocybin and psilocin, they're both the two drugs that are found in magic mushrooms that are psychoactive. And basically all of the classical hallucinogenic drugs are agonists of 5-HT2A. In fact, many drugs that act on this receptor, like antidepressants, atypical antipsychotics, like atypical antipsychotics are the main treatment for psychosis for like bipolar 1 schizophrenia. So it's kind of interesting that like, oh, like this can cause hallucinations, but if you have an antagonist, like it can be kind of like the treatment for preventing those hallucinations. And so there's a lot of antidepressants that target this specific receptor. So let's talk about SSRIs. SSRIs are, kind of like the first thing that, like, if you go in and see a doctor and be like, hey, I'm having really bad anxiety or depression or something like that, it's considered like the first line of treatment for depression and anxiety. And SSRI, like you may have heard some of this stuff before, but it's a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. It increases available serotonin in the synapse by blocking it from being reuptook. And so that just means that there's more available serotonin to go into the next neuron. As an aside, you may have also heard that, like, people who have depression just have like lower serotonin or something like that. That's not actually true. Like if you look at it, people actually have like comparable levels of serotonin, regardless of whether or not they're depressed or they're not depressed. How about these other drugs? We have mirtazapine over here, and mirtazapine is a tetracyclic antidepressant. It and other tetracyclic and tricyclic antidepressants are antagonists of 5-HT2A. So, like SSRI increases available serotonin. This blocks the receptor site. You have Seroquel over here. Seroquel is also an antagonist. It's a member of the atypical antipsychotic family of drugs. A lot of those are 2A antagonists. And, I say atypical antipsychotic, but they're actually used for a pretty broad range of things. Like Serotonin in particular is used for schizophrenia, bipolar depression. So this whole ridiculously rambly thing that I'm so happy that you actually stood around for is leading up to this point. Is you have SSRIs, which increase the amount of serotonin, and then you have 2A antagonists, which block the receptor sites from binding with serotonin. And so if you think about it, like those two are totally different things. Like one means that you have more serotonin binding, and the other means that you have less serotonin binding because you are blocking with an antagonist. So why does this work? Like, how does this make any sense at all? And the answer is that if you study people who have clinical depression, either bipolar or monopolar depression, there's an overdensity of 5-HT2A receptors, like more than there should be in like a typical person. So antagonists make sense in this situation. You block some of them, they have more normal function. And in both of these situations, your brain adapts to what you do here, like by either increasing serotonin or by blocking those receptor sites. It paradoxically downregulates these receptors in both response to antagonists and to heightened serotonin from SSRIs. And this also kind of explains why SSRIs can take like 2 to 3 weeks to kick in, because it's not just the increasing the serotonin in your brain or the availability of the serotonin, but it is also how your brain slowly adapts to that over time by changing or by downregulating these receptor sites. All right, that's it. Thank you for watching this whole ridiculously rambly thing. I just want to share something that I'm passionate about, and I hope you enjoyed.